This video is on cellular respiration and is part of the cells as the basis of life topic. It's going to be covering both aspects of cellular respiration from the course, aerobic and anaerobic. So when we look at the student learning outcomes, we're talking about energy transformations within cells, going from one type of energy to another. And in particular, the types of chemical energy that we use within cells and how they work together. Follows on from the photosynthesis video, so it's worthwhile looking at that one first. So really what we're talking about is cellular respiration is a chemical process in cells that's used to obtain ATP, which is used for cellular energy, from chemical energy in food molecules like glucose. Actually, of course, ATP is also a chemical, so it's a transformation from one type of chemical energy to another. When there's sufficient oxygen present, we can do aerobic respiration, which has three parts. Glycolysis, which happens in the cytosol, and is basically the cleavage of glucose into two pyruvate molecules, and that gives you some ATP. But the products from this reaction can go further through the mitochondria to two more steps, the citric acid cycle, sometimes also called the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain, sometimes also called phosphorylation. This further breakdown allows the release of 2 and then an extra 34 ATP molecules. So from one glucose starting off, we can get up to 38 ATP molecules. So there's a lot of energy that can be produced by aerobic respiration. You don't need to know the details of each of these steps, but just that there's 3 there and that they release a whole lot of energy. The first step happens in the cytosol and the other 2 in the mitochondria. Again, like with photosynthesis, there are multiple reactions happening here, but we only need to worry about a balanced chemical reaction that is a summary reaction for that process. So one glucose molecule and 6 oxygens are the inputs, releasing 6 CO2 molecules, 6 H2O molecules, and as I said, lots of energy. So be aware that there's energy out from this reaction. So that is why we call it an exergonic. So again, mirroring what happened with photosynthesis, we see the reactants going in are high energy. In particular, this glucose has lots of energy in the bonds there. We need to put a little bit of energy in, like with all reactions, to break those bonds and get things going. But then once that happens and the bonds are forming for the products, a whole lot of energy is released. More energy is released than what we need to put in, so we have free energy produced. Now, that free energy would just go out into the environment as heat energy unless the cell was able to capture that energy. So of course it's very important, because the cell is trying to produce energy through this process, to capture that, and that's where the ATP comes in. So ATP is used to capture as much of that energy as possible by forming high energy bonds in ATP. Not all of that energy can be captured, so some of it is lost as heat, but most of it can be captured in ATP. ATP can then be used to do cellular work, and that's the topic of the next video. If oxygen is not present, however, those processes that are happening in the mitochondria rely on oxygen, and so they can't occur. So instead we only get what's happening in the cytosol. So we have the breakdown of glucose into 2 molecules, releasing a small amount of energy and yielding 2 ATP. Depends what type of cell it's happening in. So in plant and yeast cells, the glucose, one molecule of glucose, is broken down into 2 molecules, C2H5OH, which is ethanol, and 2 molecules of carbon dioxide. So one glucose gives 2 ethanol and 2 carbon dioxide, yielding 2 ATPs worth of energy as well. In animal cells, that one glucose is split into 2 lactic acid molecules, sometimes also called lactate. So slightly different chemical reactions, but again it's a balanced chemical reaction. So either way, that one glucose ends up with 6 carbons there, going to 4 carbons there and another 2 over here, or 6 carbons there going to 2 lots of 3, 6 carbons here. So the amount of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen is always balanced in these equations. So when you're writing them down, check, count up your molecules and make sure it's balanced. It's good if you can generate these from first principles. If you know the chemical formula for ethanol, that's great. If you don't, you're going to need to remember it and learn it. So C2H5OH. Lactic acid should be fairly easy to work out because basically what we're doing here is we're splitting this one in half, so each of these numbers are halved. C6 becomes C3, H12 becomes H6, and O6 becomes O3. So lactic acid, 2 molecules of lactic acid make up 1 molecule of glucose. As I said, the yield for the anaerobic respiration, which is sometimes also called fermentation, is much lower, only 2 ATP compared to up to 38 for aerobic respiration. So that's an important point to remember. Just another point to make here, so now we've talked about photosynthesis and respiration, is that photosynthesis happens in the day and requires light. So in a plant leaf here, we've got light driving CO2, making oxygen and carbohydrates with water coming in from the roots. But that can only occur when the light is present. Whereas all plants also do respiration, but they can do it day and night because they can bring in the oxygen, combine that with the carbohydrates they produced to produce energy, releasing water and carbon dioxide. So photosynthesis happens under light conditions. Respiration can happen day and night in plants. Just to note, unfortunately, this diagram does have incorrect subscripts instead of superscripts instead of subscripts for those chemicals, so just watch out for that one. This is the correct way to write those chemical formula. That's in chapter 9, pages 77 to 83. A couple of extra videos there to help you out.